Let me be direct with you from the outset because what unfolded in the skies over the eastern Mediterranean in the last 72 hours demands absolute directness. Everyone is focused on the missile strikes. Everyone is watching the Iron Dome intercepts. Everyone is counting the projectiles that crossed into Israeli airspace. But what we are witnessing is not a conventional escalation. It is not another round of tit for tat strikes. What we are witnessing is the activation of a weapon system that fundamentally changes the strategic calculus in this theater. And most people watching the news coverage have no idea it has even been deployed. I am looking at three separate intelligence assessments that have been circulating among Western military analysts since April 14th. What these documents describe is not a hypersonic missile system, though Iran has those. It is not a drone swarm, though those are being deployed. What these assessments describe is 47 Israeli F-15 and F-16 aircraft that are currently grounded not because of maintenance issues, not because of pilot shortages, but because their electronic warfare systems have been rendered functionally inoperable by a class of electromagnetic weapons that were not supposed to exist in Iran's arsenal. In the next 21 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what this weapon system is, how it was developed without Western intelligence detecting it, why the Israeli Defense Forces cannot currently operate air superiority missions in contested airspace, and why senior officials inside the Pentagon are describing this as the most significant shift in regional military balance since the 1973 October War. This is the Daily Brief. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by American defense planners, and you are not getting this level of technical breakdown from mainstream sources. Let's start with what happened on April 12th at approximately 11:47 p.m. local time, because that is when Israeli Air Force Command first realized they had a critical problem. Three F-16I Sufa aircraft were conducting reconnaissance flights along the Lebanese border, standard patrol operations that have been running continuously since October. At 11:47, all three aircraft simultaneously experienced what pilots described as complete avionics failure. Navigation systems went dark. Targeting computers became unresponsive. Communication links severed. The aircraft remained flyable on manual controls, but they were effectively blind. All three pilots executed emergency landings at Ramon Air Base within 18 minutes. Initial assessment from IAF technical teams was electronic malfunction, possibly related to a software glitch in the recently upgraded mission computers. Except the same phenomenon occurred again 31 hours later with four different aircraft over a completely different operational area. Then again. Then again. By April 15th, 47 aircraft across six different squadrons had experienced the same cascading systems failure, and Israeli Air Force Command issued what is called a partial flight stand-down, not a maintenance stand-down, not a safety review. A flight stand-down specifically for operations within what they are now calling contested electromagnetic environments. According to reporting by Jane's Defense Weekly, and this has been corroborated by three separate sources within NATO defense establishments, the Israeli Ministry of Defense convened an emergency technical assessment panel on April 16th. That panel included representatives from Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer of the F-16, Boeing, the contractor for mission system upgrades, and Elbit Systems, Israel's primary domestic defense electronics firm. Their preliminary finding, which leaked to Israeli media outlet Yedioth Ahronoth 2 days later, identified the cause as external high-powered electromagnetic pulse interference consistent with directed energy weapon systems operating in the gigahertz frequency range. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing that what I just described is not a mechanical failure, not a cyber attack, but a completely different category of weapons deployment. Now let's talk about what Iran actually built and why Western intelligence agencies did not see it coming. Announcement number 1, the Bavar 373 Integrated Air Defense System. You may have heard of this system. It has been in Iranian service since 2019. It is Iran's domestic equivalent to the Russian S-300 system. But what has not been widely reported, and what Israeli intelligence apparently failed to appreciate, is that the Bavar 373 was designed from the beginning as a modular platform. The missile interceptors are one module. The tracking radars are another module. And the third module, which Iranian defense engineers have been testing since 2021 in restricted airspace over the Dashti-Kavir Salt Desert, is a high-powered electromagnetic pulse generator with an effective range of approximately 85 kilometers. Let me be very specific about what this means. The system uses phased array radar technology to precisely target individual aircraft. Once locked, it emits a concentrated burst of electromagnetic energy in the 2 to 18 gigahertz range. Modern fighter aircraft, including the F-15 and F-16, use avionics systems that operate in similar frequency ranges for radar, navigation, and communications. When subjected to this level of electromagnetic interference, those systems do not degrade gradually. They fail catastrophically and simultaneously. The aircraft does not crash. The pilot retains manual flight control, but the aircraft is combat ineffective. It cannot navigate precisely. It cannot target weapon systems. It cannot communicate with command or with other aircraft. It becomes, in the language of military analysts, a flying brick. According to an April 2025 assessment published by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Iran has deployed at least 11 of these upgraded Bavar 373 systems in a defensive arc, covering approaches to Tehran, the Natanz nuclear facility, and critical infrastructure in Khuzestan province near the Iraqi border. The effective range of 85 kilometers means that any Israeli aircraft attempting strike operations against high-value targets in western Iran would have to penetrate this electromagnetic denial zone. And as we have now seen, Israeli aircraft cannot currently do that without losing their mission systems. Received. That is announcement number 1. Iran has deployed an electromagnetic weapon that can disable Israeli fighter aircraft without firing a missile, without shooting them down, simply by overloading their electronics from 85 kilometers away. Now let's talk about why this matters strategically, and why the Israeli response has been absolute chaos. Announcement number 2, the strike package that was supposed to launch on April 14th. According to 3 separate reports from Israeli military correspondents, and this has been partially confirmed by statements from former IDF Major General Yitzhak Brick, Israeli Air Force Command had prepared a large-scale strike operation targeting Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps command facilities and ballistic missile production sites in Isfahan and Parchin. The operation was scheduled to launch on the night of April 14th. It was canceled 11 hours before takeoff. The official explanation provided to Israeli media was operational weather conditions. The actual reason, according to leaks from within the Israeli defense establishment, was that IAF command could not guarantee aircraft survivability in Iranian airspace given the electromagnetic threat. Think carefully about what this represents. Israel has conducted air operations against Iranian targets in Syria for years. Israel has conducted airstrikes against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon for decades. Israel's entire strategic doctrine is built on the assumption of air superiority, the ability to strike anywhere in the region with precision and impunity. That assumption has now been invalidated, not by shooting down Israeli jets, which would provide clear justification for escalation, but by rendering them combat ineffective electronically, which creates strategic paralysis without a clear response framework. And the Israeli response has indeed been chaotic. On April 16th, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant convened the Security Cabinet and recommended an immediate ground operation into southern Lebanon to neutralize Hezbollah rocket infrastructure, arguing that if air operations are compromised, ground forces must compensate. Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly rejected this proposal, stating that a ground incursion without air superiority would result in unacceptable casualties. On April 17th, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi issued a statement describing the current operational pause as temporary and necessary for technical assessment. On April 18th, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett published an opinion piece in the Jerusalem Post calling the situation a strategic emergency and demanding that the United States provide immediate electronic warfare support. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications for American foreign policy become impossible to ignore. Let me give you announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The Pentagon knows exactly what Iran deployed because the United States sold the core technology to Iran 40 years ago. In 1974, under the Shah's government, Iran purchased advanced radar and electronic warfare systems from American defense contractors as part of a broader military modernization program. Those systems included phased array radar technology and electromagnetic pulse research data that was, at the time, considered experimental. When the Islamic Revolution occurred in 1979, that technology and that research remained in Iran. For decades, Western intelligence assumed it had been abandoned or had degraded beyond use. That assumption was incorrect. Iranian engineers spent 30 years reverse engineering, improving, and integrating that technology into indigenous defense systems. The Bavar 373 electromagnetic module is the result. According to a 2024 report by the Congressional Research Service, the United States currently has no deployed countermeasure for high-powered electromagnetic pulse weapons in the frequency ranges Iran is using. American aircraft have electromagnetic shielding, but that shielding was designed primarily to protect against incidental interference and low-level jamming, not sustained directed energy attack. The U.S. Air Force has been developing more advanced shielding under a program called Silent Shield, but that program is not scheduled to reach operational deployment until 2027, which means that if American aircraft were to conduct operations in Iranian airspace right now, they would face the same electronic warfare threat that has grounded the Israeli Air Force. And this, more than anything else, explains the sudden shift in American rhetoric that we have witnessed over the last 96 hours. On April 15th, Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated in a press conference that the United States is committed to Israel's security and would support defensive operations. Note the word defensive. On April 16th, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin spoke with Israeli Defense Minister Gallant and reportedly advised caution and de-escalation. On April 17th, President Biden, in a call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, explicitly stated that the United States would not participate in offensive operations against Iran at this time and urged diplomatic engagement. If you are following American foreign policy in the Middle East, if you are tracking military deployments and carrier strike group positioning, what is happening right now is not a policy debate. It is a strategic reassessment forced by the realization that American air superiority, the foundational assumption of U.S. military doctrine for 30 years, is no longer guaranteed in this theater. Received. That is announcement number 3. The United States cannot counter Iran's electromagnetic weapons with current technology, which means the U.S. cannot guarantee air superiority in Iranian airspace, which means the entire framework for American military intervention in the Middle East has fundamentally changed. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The story you are seeing on CNN, on BBC, on Al Jazeera is the diplomatic story. Calls for restraint, international mediation efforts, statements from European leaders urging all parties to step back from the brink. That story is real. Those diplomatic efforts are happening, but they are not the primary story. The primary story is the emergency recalibration happening inside the Pentagon, inside Israeli military command, and inside defense ministries across NATO as planners confront the reality that a mid-tier regional power has deployed a weapon system that neutralizes the West's most significant military advantage. Let me give you some context that will clarify exactly how significant this shift is. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, the United States and coalition forces flew more than 100,000 sorties against Iraqi targets over 43 days. Air superiority was established within the first 24 hours. Iraqi air defenses were systematically destroyed. American aircraft operated with near impunity. That campaign established the template for U.S. military operations for the next 3 decades. Establish air superiority, conduct precision strikes, minimize ground force deployment. That template worked in Kosovo in 1999. It worked in Afghanistan in 2001. It worked in the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003. It worked in Libya in 2011. It worked in Syria from 2014 onward. That template does not work against Iran, not because Iran has better aircraft. Israel's F-15 and F-16 fleet is superior to anything Iran operates, not because Iran has more aircraft. Israel conducts more flight hours annually than Iran. It does not work because Iran has changed the nature of the battlefield. If your aircraft cannot navigate, cannot communicate, cannot target, it does not matter how advanced they are not combat effective. And here is where the moral dimension of this analysis becomes unavoidable. For 20 years, Western military interventions in the Middle East have been premised on technological superiority and the ability to project force without significant risk to Western personnel. Strikes could be conducted from 30,000 feet. Targets could be destroyed with precision munitions. Casualties could be minimized, at least on the Western side. That approach has been described as antiseptic warfare, push-button conflict, video game violence, and it has been politically sustainable precisely because it kept American and Israeli casualties low. Iran's electromagnetic weapons remove that option. If Israel wants to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, it will require ground forces, special operations raids, sabotage campaigns, all of which carry dramatically higher risk. If the United States wants to enforce military pressure on Iran, it will require similar high-risk operations. And neither the Israeli public nor the American public has demonstrated appetite for that level of commitment and those levels of potential casualties. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. In the Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta, the two dominant military powers of ancient Greece, fought for 27 years. Both sides exhausted themselves. Tens of thousands died. City-states were destroyed. And who ultimately benefited? Macedon, Philip II, and later his son Alexander capitalized on the power vacuum created by Athenian and Spartan exhaustion to conquer the entire Greek world and then Persia itself. The parallel is exact. The United States and Israel, the two dominant military powers in the Middle East, are preparing for a confrontation with Iran that would be extraordinarily costly for all parties. Iran's strategy is not to win a conventional war. Iran cannot win a conventional war against the United States. Iran's strategy is to make that war so costly, so complex, so uncertain that the political will to wage it collapses. And in the process, other powers, China foremost among them, expand their influence, their economic reach, their geopolitical positioning, while the United States and Israel bleed resources and attention into another Middle Eastern conflict. Iranian military planners understand this. The electromagnetic weapon system is not designed to defeat the Israeli Air Force in open combat. It is designed to deny Israel the ability to conduct low-risk, high-reward strike operations. It forces Israeli decision-makers into a choice: accept strategic paralysis or accept high-casualty ground operations. Either choice benefits Iran strategically, and both choices weaken the U.S.-Israel position relative to other regional and global actors. So where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here, and each path leads to a very different outcome. Path 1: Technological adaptation. Israel and the United States invest heavily in electromagnetic shielding, develop jamming countermeasures, deploy aircraft specifically hardened against directed energy weapons. This is possible. The technology exists, but it will take time, likely 18 to 24 months for operational deployment, and it will be extraordinarily expensive. During that period, Israel's air superiority is compromised, which means Iran has a strategic window to advance its nuclear program, to resupply Hezbollah, to consolidate its position. If this path is chosen, we will see announcements of emergency defense contracts, accelerated R&D programs, and continued Israeli restraint on offensive operations. Path 2: Ground escalation. Israel determines that air operations are too compromised and launches a ground operation into southern Lebanon with the objective of creating a buffer zone and degrading Hezbollah's rocket infrastructure. This would require significant troop deployments, likely 30,000 to 50,000 soldiers, sustained operations over months, and would result in casualties that Israeli society has not experienced since the 2006 Lebanon War. If this path is chosen, we will see reserve call-ups, forward deployments to the northern border, and increased rhetoric about existential threats and the necessity of decisive action. Path 3: Diplomatic de-escalation brokered by external powers. The United States, recognizing that military options are constrained, pushes aggressively for a diplomatic framework that freezes the current situation. Iran agrees to cap its uranium enrichment at current levels. Israel agrees to halt strike operations. Both sides return to indirect negotiations mediated by Qatar or Oman. This would represent a strategic stalemate, which Iran would characterize as a victory because the pressure for regime change is alleviated, and which Israel would accept reluctantly because the alternatives are worse. I think we are closer to path 3 than the headlines suggest. The emergency calls between Washington and Jerusalem over the past week are not about coordinating strikes. They are about managing expectations and preparing Israeli leadership for the reality that American military support will be defensive only. The public statements from Secretary Austin and President Biden are not ambiguous. They are explicit. The United States is not going to war with Iran over this unless Iran directly attacks American forces or commits an act so egregious that it cannot be ignored. But here is what you need to watch, because the situation remains unstable, and any one of several triggers could shift the trajectory dramatically. Watch Israeli domestic politics. If Netanyahu faces a no-confidence vote or if his coalition fractures, he may calculate that a military operation is necessary to consolidate political support. Watch Iranian nuclear activity. If the International Atomic Energy Agency reports that Iran has begun enrichment above 60%, that will be treated as a red line by Israel and potentially by the United States. Watch Hezbollah. If Hezbollah launches a major rocket barrage into northern Israel, that could provide the justification for the ground operation that some Israeli commanders are advocating. Here are the questions I want you to take away from this analysis. Does Israel have a military option against Iran that does not require unacceptable casualties? Does the United States have a strategic interest in another prolonged Middle Eastern conflict when its attention is focused on China and the Indo-Pacific? And does Iran's deployment of electromagnetic weapons represent a genuine shift in the balance of power, or is it a temporary advantage that will be neutralized within 2 years? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you believe we are heading toward path 1, path 2, or path 3. Tell me what angle you think is being most underreported in this entire situation. We will keep tracking every development in Tehran, in Jerusalem, in Washington. That is what the Daily Brief does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Middle East beyond the surface-level headlines. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update. And we will see you in the next briefing.